Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom. When we look at the concept of religion and the way philosophy, theology, etc., have developed in human history, and where it is now and where it might be going in the future. This week, I want to say this. It's been a while. What have we learned from religion? Yeah, it appears that religion has been around as long as people have. It's a little problematic as a category, but as we've talked about before, but yeah, people have had something going on in this area for a long time. What is it, and have we learned anything from it, is the question I want to ask this week. Well, one thing, and some of you know Terence McKenna, the famous psychonaut who believed that psychedelic drugs would lead to encounters with the divine. He said, time is the theater of God's becoming. And this is a fairly typical idea from people who are not traditionally theistic, but who have some kind of an idea that there may be something out there in the universe. So there is one idea. And of course, we've dealt with Gurdjieff before on Coffee and Wisdom, a Russian theologian, philosopher. He said the greatest untold story is the evolution of God. And again, I know that many fundamentalists won't agree that the idea of God is evolutionary, but of course it is. It's demonstrably so. All we have to do is look back into the older texts to see how they are discussed. As those of you who have been watching Bibles and Beer have seen, the fact is that the ancient Hebrew scriptures definitely considered that there were more gods than one. And over time, this disappears from the text, but it takes a long time to do that. So there is an evolution of the idea of God within human history, and especially in the Western world. One of the people who has dealt with this is Robert Wright and his book, The Evolution of God, from the early 2000s. Robert Wright argues that the idea of God developed and got more and more liberal according to trade routes, for example, the Silk Road, and that the Silk Road was a liberalizing force to make people understand and be friendly toward other tribal groups because of trade. And therefore, then God evolves over time out of the simple idea that we would like to get this traded for that. It's a very valid, I think, argument, and it is demonstrably true that we have Hinduism and Islam and Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism circling through a large part of Eurasia that gives us very different ideas over time about how God works. Yeah, we've been around a long time, we human beings. You think for a moment about good old Lucy, 3.2 million years ago. We have dug her up, and actually now we think there's some considerably older humanoids than Lucy. 2.8 million, we've got some jawbones there, and we watch the way the human form it works into Homo sapiens eventually. When did one of these people decide that there was a God? This is much discussed, of course, because the idea of the gods is probably a way of thinking abstractly. So when does that come into the human family? Definitely it comes in with the Neanderthals. That's demonstrably so. It's probably actually older than that. And you didn't have to be a Homo sapiens to be of a religious abstract thinking bent as a humanoid, because we can look back, and here's Altamira, of course, these beautiful cave paintings that probably have something to do with sympathetic magic. You paint the picture of the animal so that you can hunt it, for example, is one anthropological idea for how these come along. So sympathetic magic, which ties directly into shamanistic ways to form tribes and get tribes to cooperate with each other through the hunting process and agricultural process. A book that came out in 2017 called God, A Human History, I find very good. Reza Aslan is a very good religious scholar about the history of religion. He is a Sufi. Traditionally, he does come out of a Shia background. His parents immigrated from Iran. He grew up in the United States in a house that was kind of a secular form of Islam. He has explored Christianity as a younger guy, and then came back to a very liberal form of Islam for himself. And he calls religion a language. He says it's got symbols, it has metaphors in it, but every religion, every human religion is actually just a language. You learn the language and you can communicate with this and how it's working. But it's a very good book. I highly recommend it. And yes, as Huffington Post says, timely, riveting, enlightening, and necessary. It's really a page turner, believe it or not. Theology and religious history is usually not page turning material, but Reza Aslan is a very good writer. He has a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, as a matter of fact, in addition to his bona fides as a theologian. One of the things that we know, and you saw the little picture, the illustration on the front of his book is from the Cueva de los Monos in Argentina. This is something that was created somewhere between 9,000 and 13,000 years ago. We don't know what it was, but it probably has something to do with signing on to a covenantal relationship with people putting the tribal group putting their hands up on the cave wall and having them painted as some sort of ritualistic joining together as a tribal group. So the Cueva de los Monos. And also it does show that the very same things were happening in the Western world that were happening in France, certainly in the Altamira Cave. This is what Aslan has to say. I want to reflect for a few minutes on some of his ideas. So this is from God, A Human History. Research shows that children, regardless of whether they come from religious family backgrounds, conceive of God in terms of a human being with superhuman capacities. All right, to realize this, we've gone worldwide. We've done some research here, and the fact is that kids conceive of God in terms of God or gods, in terms of human beings, and we give human beings superpowers. Basically, we make them what we aren't. We die, and so let's create a God who's immortal, for example. We have to walk around, so let's invent a God that flies, and that kind of thing seems to be very much a part of human thinking in a developmental way. More from Reza Aslan. The human brain inherently conceives of the divine in human terms. Human spirituality from the earliest days to contemporary times can be understood as a series of efforts to understand the divine, whether conceived of as one God or many gods, by putting divine attributes, motivations, and even physical aspects into human terms. And again, yes, those of you who have been following along with Bibles and Beer, going back to the original Hebrew texts that are coming out of Mesopotamian texts that are even older than those, we definitely see Yahweh as a God who walks around on the earth in early Hebrew scriptures. So yeah, there's something about giving the gods the human aspects that's been very much a part of human thinking for a very long time. He also says the consistent common metaphor for understanding the divine, the humanized God. Even Islam, which explicitly rejects ascribing human properties to God, is full of anthropomorphizing elements. Humanizing God appears to be a universal impulse. And that's the main thrust and idea of the book. And what Professor Aslan is going to say is, guess what? That's not a particularly good way to think of gods if you want to have a happy human family and not have fundamentalist terrorism going on in domestic terrorism and worldwide terrorism, if you're going to have a humanized God. He says this: efforts to humanize the divine encompass ascribing to God all the best elements of human nature, generosity, love, compassion, as well as all the worst: jealousy, vengeance, violence. Religious conflicts can be understood as the consequence of humans first ascribing human attributes to God and then taking divine legitimacy from the desire to act on human jealousy, desire for vengeance, and capacity for violence. So you see where he's going with this idea. If we do our natural way of dealing with the divine and make the divine idea human with human characteristics, we are going to then ascribe the best and the worst onto that as ways to correct human social behavior. That's great when you're talking about generosity, love, and compassion. Happy world then. It's not so great when you're talking about jealousy, vengeance, and violence. So the idea of God, as far as Reza Islam is concerned, needs to be expanded into some kind of a more pluralistic, worldwide understanding. And his conclusion is this: can humans resist the impulse to humanize God and develop a more pantheistic understanding of the divine, one in which God is commensurate with the natural world rather than with humans alone? Could this reconceptualization support a more peaceful and less human-centric form of spirituality? It's a very complex argument, but also a very simple one. As long as we think of God, the average human on the planet thinks of God as a human-like super being, we are going to say that super being likes humanity and has the same kinds of prejudices that human beings have. And one of those being, hey, we love to trash the planet, don't we? So could we reconceptualize the idea, which is very clearly there in shamanistic traditions, that actually the natural world is holy and sacred and shouldn't be trashed out and should be taken care of? So can we reach, in other words, an idea of the divine that would make us act in more altruistic ways, more peaceful ways, and also in ways that consider the holiness and sacredness of the planet as well as the human being? It's a very good question, and that's why I highly recommend the book. Keep calm and follow the golden rule, I would say, is basically the conclusion from a very well-written book. And of course, yes, the golden rule is one of the good things that has come out of the anthropomorphizing of God over time. So there you have it. Thanks for joining in with Coffee and Wisdom with us. Always glad to have you along as we ask the question this week: what has humanity learned from the concept of the sacred, the divine? First Unitarian Society is a congregational humanist community dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. And that's why we do talk about ideas that seem awfully dangerous to some folks. We look at these ideas and think outside the box considerably. You can help us out by going to firstunitarian.org/donate. We are also available on PayPal. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk again tomorrow.